This story is ridiculously long. It's not that exciting either, so only have a read if you're super bored. It all happened when I was in my third year of uni. Summer break was almost upon us, and myself and 4 other friends decided to plan a getaway to some beach for a few days. Someone suggested getting some part-time work at the beach, to which I agreed. 2 of my friends had some club activity and camping trip around the same time, so in the end, 3 of us decided to apply for a job together, while the other 2 planned to visit us where we were working sometime during the break. We hopped online and started looking. There were plenty of places that were happy to hire groups of friends together for the hot summer months, and we honed in on one Japanese-style hotel called the Ryokan near the beach. We were looking forward to seeing all the cute girls. We called them to see if they were interested in hiring us, and they were. The conversation moved quickly, so we informed them that our 2 friends would be visiting us and asked to get a couple days off to hang out with them. "Sure, but you're going to have to work extra hard on the other days then," the okami-san said, and everything was settled. An okami is usually the owner or the wife of the owner of a ryokan. They are mostly in charge of waiting on and taking care of guests. We were all hyped up and headed to a facility with public baths, saunas, and other forms of entertainment after the phone call. We washed ourselves from head to toe and went to a friend's place to talk about how we were going to spend our summer working and hitting on girls. The day came for us to make our way to the resort, and I was super excited about it. When we got there, the ryokan just looked like a big 2-story house. It would have been more fitting to call it a bed and breakfast. We called out from the entrance, and a cute young girl came out, and our excitement grew tenfold. There were 7 rooms in total, 4 guest rooms, a dining area, and 2 rooms for employees. She took us to the dining room and brought out some tea. She told us her name was Misaki and that she grew up in the area. The okami-san also walked in with her and introduced herself as Makiko. She seemed like a super nice person, and if she was a tad bit younger, I might have fallen in love with her. Her husband was around somewhere, and including him, the 6 of us were to take care of the place. We sat for a bit getting to know each other, and then Makiko told us where all the rooms were. They were all on the 1st floor. She told us to go relax for a bit, and that she'd explain everything else after we got our things organized. This was when one of my friends, Tomoaki, asked, "Aren't the guest bedrooms upstairs?" "Oh no, we're not using the 2nd floor anymore," Makiko replied. We just figured they were going to open it up once they got busier and didn't think anything of it. We walked to our room and set our things down. I looked out the window at the beautiful nature and felt really relaxed. It might get busy in the coming days, but I felt lucky to be able to spend my entire summer in a place like this, not to mention the potential hookups with some sexy beachgoers. Our job wasn't super difficult, but it wasn't easy either. There were a few minor hiccups, but everyone at the workplace was real helpful, so it wasn't stressful at all. The first week went by quickly. The 3 of us were hanging out when Tomoaki said, "We found a really good place, didn't we?" To which my other friend, Kai, said, "Yeah, and they pay pretty well too." I was agreeing with them both, but mentioned that we'll probably become a lot busier since the high season was going to start soon. "I wonder if they're going to open up the 2nd floor when it does," Tomoaki said. "I don't think so. I think Makiko lives up on the 2nd floor," replied Kai. Tomoaki and I both looked at him and said, "Really?" Kai admitted he wasn't sure, but that he saw Makiko taking food upstairs on several occasions. Neither myself nor Tomoaki had ever noticed, but Kai was in charge of sweeping the ground outside the entrance in the late afternoons, and he would see her taking trays of food up to the 2nd floor. A few days later, I was cleaning the hallway when I saw her. I saw Makiko coming out of one of the guest bedrooms. Misaki is usually the one in charge of cleaning all the rooms, so I noticed straight away. It immediately made me wonder what she was doing in there. At the end of the day, I told Kai and Tomoaki about what I saw, and to my surprise, Tomoaki had also seen her coming out of one of the guest rooms before. He hadn't told us because he didn't want to accuse her of doing anything untoward without any proof. Besides, she might have had a legitimate reason to be in there. Tomaki had a point there. Considering we still had a month left, we discussed whether we should just turn a blind eye. But we were young uni kids, and our curiosity got the better of us. Kai suggested we follow Makiko, but the ryokan was way too small for that. She would notice us straight away. In conclusion, we decided to report to each other if we caught her doing anything suspicious, and went to bed. The next night, we were all hanging out in our room after work when Kai called us over from the corner. He said, "You know how I told you I saw Makiko go upstairs before? I only ever saw her go in, but today I decided to hang around until she came back out, and she came out after about 5 minutes. And? Tomaki asked. Well, Makiko always eats with us. But she takes food upstairs, so that must mean someone lives up there. She never told us about anyone living up there, nor have we ever seen anyone else coming out. Tomoaki said, True, seems a bit strange, but maybe they have a sick family member or something. I thought so too, but a sick person doesn't usually finish eating an entire meal in 5 minutes, do they? Seems like a pretty healthy appetite to me. Not sure if you can really judge how sick a person is by how fast they eat, Tomoaki replied. But it's definitely sus. That's why I'm telling you guys this. We all went silent and were probably thinking the same thing. Who was living upstairs? The following day, we finished our work as fast as possible and the 3 of us met up outside. We waited for Makiko, and sure enough, she came out carrying some food on a tray. I should probably mention that the stairs leading to the 2nd floor is around the corner from the entrance and on the outside of the building. There's a door that leads to the stairs. I apologize if it's a bit difficult to understand. Anyway, we watched her open the door and disappear up the stairs. About 5 minutes later, she came back down with empty plates. She didn't notice us there and walked back into the ryokan. See how quick that was? Kai said. Tomoaki and I nodded in agreement. Who could be upstairs? Tomoaki asked. Kai replied, Not sure. Want to go look? We were all a bit scared, but decided to go check it out. Standing outside the door, Tomoaki wondered out loud whether it was locked or not, but when I turned the knob, the door opened. I opened it a few centimeters, just enough for Kai, who was standing to the left of me, to peek inside when he grimaced and pinched his nose. What's wrong? Tomoaki asked. Something smells real bad. Tomoaki and I didn't smell a thing, but Kai was reeling back from it. Tomoaki was already freaking out, so he got pissed off at Kai, thinking he was making it all up to scare them. Are you telling me you can't smell that? Open the door a bit more then, said Kai. What, the smell of dust? I retorted. Wait, I can't smell it anymore. Tomoaki replied, Quit playing around. I swear to God if something happens, I'm gonna leave you behind. Dude, I wasn't joking around. I swear it smelled like something rotten. I told both of them to shut up. The stairs were ridiculously narrow. It was only wide enough for one person to fit, and there were no lights. We could barely see the top of the stairs from the light that was coming in from outside. But we could see that there was another door there. I quietly said, Only one of us can go up there. The other 2 backed out straight away, so I decided to go. I need to find out who's up there, or I won't be able to sleep. I figured there wasn't a better time to get to the bottom of this. At least the guys would be here waiting for me, and I wasn't all alone. I made them promise to come get me if something happened. They were banned from running away and leaving me behind. And if nothing happened, I told them I'd kill them if they made a loud noise to scare me. That's if I didn't die of a heart attack first. I took my first step and slowly began climbing the dim stairs. When I was halfway up, I began hearing a strange sound, like something was cracking. Feeling scared, I turned around to look down at Tomoaki and Kai. They didn't seem to hear anything and were looking at me with a thumbs up sign. I guess they were trying to tell me that everything was okay on their end. I nodded slightly and turned back around. This was an old house, so it was probably the walls or the stairs that was making these sounds. Now, there was barely any light reaching me, and my curiosity was beginning to dissipate, slowly being taken over by dread. I wanted to turn around and run back down. My mind was starting to play tricks on me with what-if scenarios. What if I squinted and I saw something standing by the door? What if? The cracking sounds were beginning to get louder, and I had a sensation like I was stepping on something. Insects? I shivered and got goosebumps thinking about them beneath my feet. I couldn't sense anything actually moving, and it was too dark to see. I turned around again. I was too high up to see their faces clearly now. They were just two silhouettes, and they still had their thumbs up, trying to be encouraging. A few more steps, and I was finally at the door. That's when the smell almost knocked me out. I reeled back just like Kai had done a couple of minutes ago. It smelled like rotten food and sewage all mixed together. I tried looking around to see where the smell could be coming from. At the end of the hall, I saw a mountain of food piled up on the floor. That was where the smell was coming from. And I don't know how I didn't realize it earlier, but it was covered with hundreds of flies. Then I noticed something else. There was a bunch of plywood hammered into the door and dozens of ofuda stuck on them. In Shinto and Buddhism in Japan, an ofuda is a talisman made out of various materials such as paper, wood, cloth, or metal. Certain kinds of ofuda are intended for a specific purpose, such as the protection against calamity or misfortune, safety within the home, or even to find love. They may be kept on one's person or placed on other areas of the home, such as gates, doorways, kitchens, or ceilings. In this story, they were obviously used to keep something trapped inside the room on the second floor. The nails that were hammered into the plywood were done haphazardly and were jutting out at all angles. There were thin ropes tied around all of them, making it look like a giant spider web. Now, this was the first time I saw an ofuda in my life, so I can't say for sure that those pieces of paper were that. But I doubt they were stickers. It clearly looked like someone was trying to keep something in that room. At this moment, I knew I'd made a huge mistake to come up here. I turned around, and just as I was about to go down the stairs, I heard it. A scratching noise coming from behind me and from the other side of the door. And then, I thought my heart would stop beating right then and there. Was someone really inside that room? Who was it? I felt like I'd been thrust into a horror movie, except in a horror movie, they usually turn around or run away. In real life, it doesn't work like that. You're too freaked out to do either of those things. So you're basically frozen in place, and the only thing you can move are your eyeballs. I broke out in a cold sweat. I could hear the scratching and breathing the entire time. I wanted to run down the stairs, but I couldn't get my legs to work. All of a sudden, everything went silent. It was only for a split second, the time it took for me to blink just once, and then another, and more scratching. It wasn't coming from behind the door anymore. It was coming from right above my head. It took this thing a split second to move from the door to the ceiling space right above me. My legs turned to jelly, and I could barely hold myself up. I had no voice, but I was screaming inside for help. My heart was beating so loud, and I could feel the blood vessels in my brain pulsating and hear it gushing. Something flickered in my peripheral vision. Every sound and movement terrified me, and I really didn't want to look at what it was, but seeing that my eyes were the only thing that I could move, I did. It was Kai and Tomoaki. They were yelling at me from downstairs and gesturing me to come back down. That was when I could finally hear their voices, as if everything else suddenly got muted. "Hey, are you okay? Hurry up and come back!" As soon as I heard their voices, my body broke free from its spell and I ran down, almost falling on my face as I did so. I don't remember much after this, but I apparently had my eyes closed when I was coming down, ran right past them and straight into our room. I'd never been so terrified in my life. In fact, the word terrified doesn't even cut it. They caught up with me in the room and asked whether I was okay and what had happened. I couldn't answer them. The sounds that I heard up there were still on replay and I didn't want to think about it. That's when Tomoaki asked, "What were you eating up there?" I didn't understand the question. "What?" I asked. That's when he told me. As soon as you got up there, you crouched down. Kai and I couldn't see well because it was too dark, but you were eating something. You were actually stuffing it into your mouth. And, He trailed off and I saw his and Kai's eyes turned down towards my shirt. I looked down at myself. The whole front of my shirt was covered in rotten food. The horrible stench hit me and I scrambled to the bathroom and threw up. I began to cry. I had no idea what was going on. I remembered everything the entire time I was up there. I remember the smell, the mountain of rotten food, the door and the sounds that I heard. I never once crouched down, and there was no way in hell I would ever eat all that rotten food. But what I saw now couldn't be denied. Both my shirt and my hands were covered in it. I thought I would go crazy. The guys came in to check on me and told me to tell them what happened. They could see that I wasn't behaving normally. I felt like I was going to faint, but I slowly began to recount what I had experienced up there. Even though what I was telling them wasn't what they observed me doing, they didn't dare interrupt me. They nodded and listened until the end, and I'd never felt more relieved when I was done. Then I felt it. My legs and feet were stinging. Unsure what to make of it, I looked at my knees and the back of my feet, and there were dozens of small cuts on them. How and when did this happen? I continued to examine myself when I found some small pieces of plastic embedded in some of the cuts. Some were red, some were almost black, and others were white. I was turning them over in my hand, trying to figure out what they were. "Let me see," Kai said as he took a piece and looked at it. A few seconds later, he let out a small yelp and threw it onto the ground. "What is it?" Tomoaki asked. Seems like he couldn't figure it out either. "Look at it," said Kai earnestly. "What? What is it? Just tell us, you're freaking us out." Kai said quietly, Aren't those nails?" We all froze. I could hear that scratching noise again. Whatever was in that room must have been using their nails to scratch at the door, the walls, and the ceiling. The cracking sounds that I heard when I was walking up the stairs, the sensation that I was stepping on something. It must have been tiny pieces of nails that belonged to whatever this thing was. I probably cut myself when I was on my knees eating the rotten food and when I scrambled down the stairs to get out of there. It all made sense. There was only one thing left to do, I said. I need to get out of here. Both of them agreed straight away. I told them that we needed to tell Makiko before we leave, but they weren't so sure about it. They stated that even though she had taken care of us until now, we'd seen her go up there with our own eyes. She was taking an active part in keeping that thing up there, and Tomoaki and Kai were afraid of how she might react if we told them what we had done. I cut them off and told them we weren't going to tell her that I went upstairs. We were just going to tell her that we wanted to quit. Plain and simple. That night, we packed our things and got into the futon. We were all freaked out and tried to sleep, squeezed next to each other like a tin of sardines. None of us slept a wink, and morning came. I think we were all awake, but no one spoke when the alarm bell suddenly went off and I felt Kai flinch at the sound. He's a really kind and sensitive guy, and when we turned the lights off the previous night, he said to me, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'm sure you experienced something so much more terrifying than I did. I'm sorry I didn't go help you." I felt my eyelids get hot in the dark. He was such a great friend. With the new day, my mind had recovered a little bit, and I began to wonder, what did he even mean when he said that I experienced something more terrifying than he did? I was the only one up on the second floor, and him and Tomoaki were outside just watching me. Maybe I scared him to death when I almost came tumbling down the stairs. That must be it. I think I was starting to overthink a bit too much, so I really wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I wanted to go home and enjoy the rest of my summer with my friends. But something was up with Kai. He was reacting like a scared dog to every sound we made, and he kept staring at the cuts on my legs. Tomoaki noticed too and walked over to him and, grabbing his shoulder, said, "Hey, you okay? You go crazy because you didn't get enough sleep or what?" "Shut up!" Kai yelled and swatted Tomoaki's hand away with such force that we both fell silent in shock. "There's no way I'm okay. We're both going through hell. You have no idea what's going on, so quit pretending like you do," Kai yelled, referring to him and I going through hell. I didn't understand anything. Kai was going through hell too? There was obviously something more going on than him just being scared with my story. The two of them were especially close. Tomoaki would often play pranks on him, and Kai would let him. I'd never seen Kai raise his voice towards Tomoaki, and judging from his shocked face, I don't think he'd ever experienced it either. I finally asked him, "What do you mean, Kai? You were downstairs the whole time." "Yeah, I was. I was watching you the whole time." He looked down and went quiet for a bit before whispering, "It's still looking." What the hell was he saying? I honestly thought he'd gone crazy. Maybe he got possessed by whatever was up there. Kai started talking. His voice was shaky. "Yes, I was downstairs, but I was looking the whole time." "At me going up the stairs?" I asked. "No. Well, yeah, at first I was watching you, but once you got to the top, I started to see it." I said okay in a small voice. I didn't want to hear the rest, but the guys listened to me yesterday without interrupting, and they were there for me, so I wanted to do the same for Kai. I knew I had to hear him out and let him speak. "What did you see?" I asked. Kai fell silent again for a bit before saying, I think it was a shadow. At first I thought it was your shadow. But when you crouched down and started eating all that food, the shadow was moving the entire time. Your actual shadow got smaller as you got lower, and Tomoaki and my shadows were obviously where they were supposed to be. But there was something else moving around up there. Not just one. I think there were 3, maybe 4 of them. I got goosebumps all over my body. I hoped to God he was lying, but even as those thoughts crossed my mind, I knew he wasn't. I could tell by his face, his voice, his everything. In fact, he would have probably punched me if I voiced my doubts. That's how serious he was. I was alone up there. There wasn't even enough space for 4 or 5 people to move around, I said quietly. I know, but they weren't people. You know that, right? And besides, no human could do what I saw. Kai replied. What do you mean? I asked. They were all hanging off the walls, like spiders. They were hanging off the walls and the ceiling, and they were just moving around. And Kai was reliving what he saw the day before, and he started to breathe hard. I told him to calm down and to breathe slowly, told him we were here for him and that it was all right. They weren't people. They were shaped like people, but they weren't actual people. I understood what he was trying to say. My heart was beating so fast by this point that I thought it would come out of my mouth. I knew instantly that what he saw wasn't any type of shadow either. It's impossible for a shadow to climb walls and go on the ceiling on its own accord. I'm not the smartest person around, but I'm not that stupid either. If what Kai saw were actual shadows, that means there were people up there with me. And there was no one else there but me. So that means that I didn't notice these shadow creatures all around me. Not only that, but I was eating rotten food all the while. What were those scratching and uneven breathing sounds that I heard? I thought they were coming from the other side of the door and walls, but could it be that they were coming from right beside me? I started to feel dizzy with all these thoughts running through my head. Kai seemed to have calmed down a bit and turned to Tomoaki and apologized for going off at him. Tomoaki also apologized to him for antagonizing him. While they were making up, I was doing my best to calm my racing heart and getting my breathing in check. Tomoaki then asked, "Hey Kai, you said just now that it was still looking." "Oh, it was nothing. I was just freaking out. Sorry. Everything's all good." It was a fake laugh through and through. He was trying to smile as if nothing was wrong, but his eyes were looking in another direction. This has nothing to do with anything, but it's something I can't forget to this day because of how eerie it looked. While Kai was trying to fake laugh his way out, his bottom eyelid was twitching uncontrollably. Anyway, getting back to the story, Tomoaki and I didn't push Kai to explain after that. We were too scared to find out the truth. I mean, think about it. He just told us all these terrible things that he witnessed yesterday, and yet he refused to tell us what he was seeing right at that moment. It had to be a million times scarier. So yeah, you might think we're cowards, but I might have gone insane and my heart might have literally blown into pieces if he told us any more. We all sat there unsure of how to proceed when we heard Misaki calling out for us from the hallway. Breakfast was ready. We didn't notice that a couple of hours had already gone by since we woke up. None of us had an appetite, but I didn't want to raise any red flags, so after I slowly got to my feet, I said to the guys, "Let's quickly eat and then tell them we're quitting." Tomoaki agreed, but Kai refused. Instead, he asked Tomoaki if he could borrow his laptop. He wanted to research something urgently and told us to go eat because we didn't have much time. We said okay and told him we'd bring back some rice balls for him. Thinking back now, we were wrong on so many levels to eat breakfast on the day we were going to quit. Pretty sure a lot of you thought exactly that, but we did. We went and ate their food just before quitting. When we entered the dining room, Makiko looked at us, then at my legs, and said with a beautiful smile across her face, "Good morning, boys. Did you sleep well?" It was the first time she had asked that question. Considering what happened the day before, we couldn't help but feel extremely uncomfortable and creeped out. I couldn't speak because she caught me so off guard, but Tomoaki quickly replied and said everything was great and apologized for being late. He smacked me in the ass, which brought me around. I told them Kai was feeling sick and asked Misaki if she could make some rice balls for him. She agreed and suggested that Kai should stay in bed today. We didn't reply because we couldn't exactly tell her that that was unnecessary because we were going to quit right after. Makiko was smiling and looking at me throughout breakfast. It was a repetition of, eat a couple of bites, then look at me for a fair while, back to a bite or two, then to me. Misaki and her husband must have noticed because I caught them looking up at her periodically. Wanting to get out of this tremendously awkward situation, we quickly ate our food, excused ourselves, and went to get Kai so we could notify Makiko of our decision. As we were approaching our room, we heard Kai's voice. He was on the phone with someone, and we didn't want to interrupt, so we waited quietly until he hung up. Kai ended the conversation by telling whoever it was that it had to be done today and that he would be there. I guess he made plans to go somewhere after we left the ryokan. We didn't want to pry, so we didn't ask him anything, and the three of us headed back to the dining room. Misaki was tidying up, and Makiko was nowhere to be seen. I immediately wondered whether she was up there. I had a flashback of her carrying a tray of food and disappearing up the stairs. She probably put it in the same place each time, and after repeating that for days, the end result was that huge mountain of rotten food. What could be the motivation for all of this? I told myself to stop thinking about it. Today was our last day here. We were getting out of this place and we would be able to forget any of this ever happened. I was going to force myself to forget everything. Tomoaki asked where Makiko was. Misaki said she was probably outside watering the plants, but she'd be back shortly. Oh, Misaki, if none of this happened, how I would have loved to get with you, I thought. After a while, Makiko walked in, and when she saw the three of us sitting there, not working, she asked us what was wrong. I took the lead and spoke. We would like to speak to you for a moment, if that's all right. She sat down in front of us and asked us again what was wrong. I said, I know it's completely selfish of us, but we would like to stop working here as of today. Kai and Tomoaki didn't skip a beat as they both said please and bowed their heads down. Makiko's face didn't change as she sat there silently. It freaked me out. Nothing moved, not even her eyebrows. It was as if she knew what was coming. She finally chuckled and spoke. I see. All right. Well, I guess there's nothing I can do, is there? She then proceeded to tell us about our wage, how to clean our room, etc., and told us to come get her once everything was done. We didn't expect things to go smoothly and felt somewhere deep inside that something was off. Regardless, we jumped into action. We'd already packed our bags the night before, so all we had to do was clean our room. Unless we were dog-tired from work, we went to the beach for a swim when we clocked off and only came back to sleep. Even though we were 3 males sharing a room, it was on the clean side, and after about an hour, everything was in order. We grabbed our bags and went back to the dining room to say our last goodbyes to Makiko, her husband, and Misaki, who looked sad to see us go. We thanked them and apologized again for our abrupt decision to leave. Makiko came over to us, also thanking us for our service. She handed each of us a brown envelope which was quite heavy and a small cloth bag which was light. Misaki then came forward and gave all of us some rice balls for our trip home. It was such a sweet gesture that I had to look away to avoid from getting teary-eyed. You might think I'm emotionally unstable for getting sentimental a mere 12 hours or so after going through the scariest shit ever, but when you meet people who take really good care of you, it's really hard to say your final goodbyes. After all of that, we asked Misaki to call a taxi for us. We took a bus when we came here, but we were too tired and wanted to get home as quick as possible. Makiko's husband volunteered to drive us to the train station, but Kai politely declined. When the taxi arrived, they all came out to see us off. It might have looked like a sweet goodbye if you saw us all there, but in actuality, the 3 of us were literally in the midst of running away from this place. I turned around before I climbed in and caught a glimpse of the door that led to the 2nd floor. It looked like it was slightly open, and I quickly turned away. Once we were inside, we told the driver where to go, and it pulled away from the ryokan. When it disappeared from view, Kai took out a piece of paper and told the driver to take us to that new address instead. The driver said it was quite far and it wouldn't be cheap, but Kai assured him that it was all good. He turned around to Tomoki and I sitting in the back seat. There's somewhere I have to go, and you guys are coming with me, he said. Where the hell was he taking us? Seeing how Kai was earlier that morning, neither of us asked where we were headed. I was afraid he might snap again like he did towards Tomoaki. A couple minutes went by when the driver said, "There's a car following us. Do you know who it might be?" We all turned around and saw a small pickup truck driving right up the taxi's arse. There was a man waving his hand out the driver's side window, and we realized it was Makiko's husband. Thinking one of us left something behind, we asked the driver to stop. Makiko's husband also stopped his car, walked straight up to us and said, "You guys can't go home like this." To which Kai replied, "We're not going home. There's no way we can go home in this situation." The two were definitely on the same wavelength, but Tomoaki and I, well, we were clueless, so I straight up asked them what was going on. The husband turned to me, looked me straight in the eyes and asked, "You went there, didn't you?" My heart skipped 2 beats. How did he know? I immediately felt scared. I knew it. I had done something unforgivable. I answered him honestly and told him that I did. He let out a sigh and said, "If you go home like this, they'll take you." I thought, wait, what? Take me? What's gonna take me? Come on, I was supposed to finally get out of here and enjoy the rest of my summer. I looked at Tomoaki for some kind of support. He was staring at me wide-eyed. I turned to Kai and he said, "It's all right, I've set up an appointment to go get exercised. I've already spoken to them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were saying that I was possessed. I was gonna die. That was the only way this story was going to end. Why didn't the husband warn us to stay away from such a dangerous place? It was my decision to go up there, but at this point, I desperately needed to blame someone else for my stupid actions. The husband said to Kai, "An exorcism, you say? Can you see them?" Kai didn't respond, but Tomoaki interrupted. "What does he mean, Kai? What can you see?" Kai replied, "Please, don't ask me anything." Now it was Tomoaki's turn to get pissed as he grabbed Kai by the collar of his shirt, demanding an answer. The husband stepped right in to stop him and said, "Quit it. You two should be grateful for Kai. You guys can't see them yet. Kai is in the most danger." We both looked at Kai, who was standing there with a really troubled look. Why is Kai in danger? I'm the one that actually went up there. "I know, but you can't see them, can you?" the husband asked. "What do you mean? What am I supposed to be seeing?" "I don't know," the husband replied flatly. What in the actual hell was going on? Here he was telling us Kai was in danger, but he couldn't even tell us what he was supposedly seeing. He continued, "All I know is that they're black. But," he looked at Kai, "I doubt an exorcism will do you any good." "Why?" Kai asked desperately. "Because, well, something similar happened in the past, but I can't get into it." "But it's worth a try, right?" Kai continued. The husband agreed that it was worth a try, but then he said something that broke Kai down. He said, "What if it doesn't work? Once you see them fully, it's going to be real fast." I couldn't figure out what he meant by that. What's going to be real fast? But Kai crumbled as he heard those words and began to cry. Tomoaki and I stood there, unable to console him. Just then, the taxi driver opened the window and asked us if everything was all right. He must have sensed that something serious was going on. None of us replied, and Kai was laying on the ground, face down, crying like hell. The husband finally apologized to the driver and told him to leave us there. The driver didn't know what to do as he looked at the 3 of us to make sure that was what we wanted. The husband ignored him and said to Kai, "Don't you know why I chased after you guys? Because I know someone who knows what's going on. I'm going to take you to him. He already knows we're coming and he told me to take you guys straight away. We don't have time. Just trust me." Kai, with his face crumpled up and wet from tears, squeezed out some words between his hiccups. He was a mess. He was going through something from the day before, something so big that it was crushing him from the inside. This was the one and only time I saw him cry like this. I told the driver it was okay and paid for our fare. We climbed in the husband's truck. Kay sat inside while Tomoaki and I sat on the tray. It was the most uncomfortable ride of my life because he drove at top speed, not caring that the 2 of us were bouncing around in the back. I heard Tomoaki give out a girly scream, but I ignored him. Don't know how long we drove for. It probably wasn't that long, but my arse and tailbone were aching when we finally came to a stop in front of a regular-looking house. There was a small torii gate next to it and some stairs through it. We were taken to the house. As the husband rang the doorbell, he warned us to only answer questions that were asked of us. A woman came to the door a short while later. She looked to be in her 20s and made a big impression because she had a huge mole on the center of her forehead. She took us through to a tatami room where 3 people were sitting, waiting for us. I guess one of them was a monk, one was a middle-aged man, and the third was an old man. The 3 of us and the husband sat across from the 3 men. The old man asked if we were the 3 in question, to which the husband said yes, and told him that Kai was already seeing the shadow figures. Was he the one that went upstairs? Asked the monk. No, that was him, pointing at me. This one watched from outside, answered the husband. Have you experienced something like this before? Have you ever seen any entities? The monk directly asked Kai. Kai replied that he hadn't, and the monk looked surprised by that answer, saying how strange it was. I looked over at Kai. He was sitting as stiff as a board, but his arms were visibly shaking. He then said, Am I going to die? Well, if it keeps going this way, then yes, you will die. They will take you. Kai stopped shaking as he looked down, his eyes wide and staring at the tatami in front of him. The monk said, It's normal that you don't understand what's going on. And you, he said, turning to me, did you feel anything when you went upstairs? I heard noises and weird breathing sounds, and there were lots of things stuck onto the door. I think they were ofuda. I see. So you obviously felt a presence there, and although you couldn't see it, you heard it. Its presence usually can't be felt by regular people and lives up there quietly. It didn't really surprise me because by this time I knew that whatever was up there wasn't human. The monk slowly stood up. Kai, can you see it now? No, but the scratching sound won't stop. Huh. Okay. It means it can't get into this room. I made sure of it, but it's trying to break through. We can't stay in here forever though. We're gonna have to walk out of here. Let me warn you that it's going to appear. I know it's going to be really tough for you, but you gotta hang in there and stay strong. I promise I'll get you through this. Kai nodded his head up and down, and the 3 of us followed him out of the house. We went through the torii gate and up the stairs. The husband had a few words with the men, bowed to the monk, and left us there, which instantly made me feel lonely. Kai was looking all around, his back hunched over, obviously scared out of his mind, so we made sure he was protected between us as we made our way up. A temple came into view as we reached the top, but instead of going in, the monk turned right and continued walking. There was another torii gate and more stairs up ahead. Before going through the gate, he turned and asked Kai, Can you see it? Yes, it's standing on 2 legs and it's been following us. Standing? It must have been really happy to know that you could see it. We're running out of time. We must hurry. When we finished climbing the stairs, there was a small building that looked like a cabin. Nothing compared to the temple we just saw. The monk went around to the back and called us over. He explained that we were going to stay there for the night. He said, There are no lights inside. You are to remain silent no matter what until daylight breaks. No cell phones either. Anything that emits any sort of light is banned from here on out, and no sleeping or eating allowed. If you need to go to the toilet, you must do so in here. He gave each of us a bag. Upon closer inspection, I did a double take because the bag was made of cloth. How's that going to work? The monk answered my question before I asked it and explained that it was made so that liquid couldn't leak out. It was a bit hard to believe, but there were more important things to worry about. He passed what looked like a bamboo tube around and told us to drink the water inside it. He did the same and proceeded to spray us with it. "Go inside," he said to us. Just as Kai stepped through the threshold, he came running back out, covering his mouth, and threw up. Tomoaki and I looked on in shock, and the monk asked us urgently, "You boys didn't go upstairs today, did you?" "No, we went yesterday," I answered. "That's strange. I just purified you so you could go inside, but..." His eyes were wandering around when it stopped at Kai's small man purse. "Did any of you receive anything while you were there?" I answered without really thinking much that we received our wages and a pouch from Makiko and some rice balls from Misaki. "Kai, do you have any of those on you right now?" "The rice balls are in my other bag, but I do have the money and the pouch with me." Kai took them both out and handed them to the monk. He opened the cloth bag first. "This," he said as he showed us its contents. We all peered inside and swallowed. It was stuffed with fingernails, the same red and black pieces of nails that were stuck on my knees and my feet the day before. Kai threw up again. Seeing it happen a second time, I ended up throwing up too. It smelled horrible, and the monk stood there with a grimace on his face. He told all of us to take out everything we had and that he would hold on to them. He made Kai drink another sip and sprayed him again with it. This time, we were able to enter without any problems. "We can't open this door until tomorrow morning. Everyone else will be down in the main hall and no one will be coming up here until daylight. You must ignore anything you hear and you must remain silent. Do not talk to each other and do not let it know where you're seated within this room." All we could do was nod in silence, feeling like we shouldn't let out a sound from that point forward. The monk looked at each of us, shut the door, and walked away. It was cool inside. I was worried about not being able to drink or eat until tomorrow, but it was a comfortable temperature at least, and figured I could tough it out till then. This building was pretty old, and you could see tiny gaps between the wood panels of the wall. The light seeped in through these cracks, and I could see Kai and Tomoaki's face clearly. It was a strange feeling to not be able to communicate even though we could see each other. I nodded at them as if to say everything will be okay, and they nodded in return. After a while of sitting in silence, we looked at each other less and less. Not knowing how much time had passed, nor how many more hours we had left, and not being able to talk, all we could do was sit there absent-mindedly. It was still light outside, even though it felt like hours upon hours had already gone by. Tomoaki started moving around, and I saw him pull out a pen and a wrapping paper for a chewing gum. He hadn't listened to the monk and kept these things from him. Seeing this gave me a small sense of relief in this deafening silence and glum situation. He scratched something down on the paper and handed it to me. It read, "Are you guys okay?" I tried to write as small as possible and wrote, "I'm fine. How about you, Kai?" "I'm okay for now. I don't see anything and can't hear anything." The pen and paper went back to Tomoaki. He stated he still had 4 pieces of chewing gum, so a total of 8 pieces of paper. We knew we could only write while it was light out, so thus began our conversation on paper. We tried to guess what time it was. We got there around 1 p.m. and figured it was around 4 o'clock. The 3 hours felt so long. 1 piece of paper gone. Second piece of paper. Tomoaki wrote that my writing was too big, to which I apologized with a hand gesture. I mentioned I was hungry. Kai didn't have anything to write, so he passed it back to Tomoaki. He wrote, "Me too." The silence brought nothing but a feeling of emptiness and the need to talk to one another, but once we were able to communicate, we had nothing to say. I knew I had to write this important message before it got too dark to read. I said, "No matter what happens, we're in this together. We can do it." Kai agreed and Tomoaki wrote, "What if I scream?" I told him to stuff something in his mouth. Kai said we didn't have anything on us, and Tomoaki suggested maybe he should take his clothes off. I ended this ridiculous back and forth by saying, "Let's hope nothing happens until tomorrow comes." The monk never said nothing was going to happen. In fact, he spoke as if something was definitely going to happen, and that's why he gave us all those warnings. We wanted tomorrow to come as quick as possible, but we were also deathly afraid for night to approach. In fact, I was already shitting myself sitting in there. The only thing that made me feel a bit better was the fact that I could see my friends. A heavy cloud hung over us because of what I wrote, so I took the pen and paper and said, "Come on, say something. We don't have much more daylight left." I gave it to Tomoaki. He thought for a bit and asked what we wanted to do when we got home. I told him I needed to go to Tsutaya to return an overdue DVD. It wasn't true, but I wanted to take our mind off of what was happening to us right at that moment. It seemed to work because the guys each wrote what they wanted to do and the air seemed to lift just a bit. We continued to communicate this way and the minutes ticked by. When we were down to the last couple sheets of paper, Kai wrote, "I'm going to heed everything the monk said. I don't want to die." Tomoaki and I stared at those words. None of us have mentioned our own death like this before. I mean, of course not. We were young uni kids and no one really thinks they might die unless they're ill or something. So, seeing our friend write those words shook us to our core and brought us back to reality. I looked into Kai's eyes and gave him a strong, reassuring nod. We stopped writing after this. Taking comfort in each other's presence, we waited for nightfall. Sitting there in silence and having nothing to do, the sound of the cicada crying was ridiculously loud at first. I eventually got used to it and it turned to white noise. But then I heard something else. I couldn't hear it very well at first, but I knew it wasn't the sound of nature. I did my best to concentrate on it, to try to isolate it, and it slowly became clearer. It was that breathing sound. I looked at Kai straight away. It was a bit darker now, so I couldn't see him as much as before, but he didn't seem to have noticed anything. I couldn't remember whether I had told him about that breathing noise. Maybe he'd never heard it before, or maybe he just hadn't noticed yet. In this silence, all of our senses were heightened, and Kai noticed straight away that I was feeling extremely nervous and scared. He started looking all around when he stopped his gaze past my shoulder, right behind me. The whites in his eyes grew and he froze. Tomoaki saw Kai freeze and he looked in the same direction but couldn't seem to find what he was staring at. I was too scared to turn around. But I could hear it. Those airy, irregular breaths. I could tell that it was standing really close to me. We remained frozen until we began to hear something dragging along the ground outside. Tomoaki heard this too, and he grabbed my arm. Now there was a strange squeaking sound between the breathing. I could only hear the sounds, but it was walking circles around the building. I felt Tomoaki's heartbeat pulsating from his arms as he grabbed onto me. I didn't have the mindset to look over at either him nor Kai, but I'm sure they were frozen and barely breathing. None of us moved a muscle. I shut my eyes tight and covered my ears to block out the sounds. I prayed for it to go away. I don't know how much time went by. Maybe it was just a few minutes, but when I opened my eyes and looked around, it was pitch dark inside. I couldn't see a thing. And the sound was gone. I wasn't sure whether that wave of terror was over or whether that thing was still outside somewhere. Regardless, I couldn't move. I wasn't allowed to ask if the guys were all right. I knew Tomoaki was right next to me because he was still holding on to my arm. I got really worried about Kai because he was clearly looking at something just before. I tried to look for him, but it was like I'd gone blind. All I could see was pitch darkness no matter how hard I opened my eyes and tried to see. I took Tomoki's hand in mine and slowly began to move in the direction of where Kai was. I went as slow as possible to not make a sound and as to not scare the guys. If I scared either of them and they panicked, I knew it would be the end. I held onto Tomoki's hand with my left hand, stretched my right arm out and slowly crept forward. I waved my arm around to increase my chances of finding Kai when my fingertips bumped into something hard. My heart almost exploded. From its texture, I knew I'd hit a wall. That's weird. I was sure I moved towards the direction of Kai, but he wasn't there. I started to panic. I turned and we began to move. Again, we hit a wall. I felt like crying. I couldn't even call out to ask where Kai was. I stood there not knowing what else to do when Tomoki pulled on my arm. He took over and began moving forward. Once we reached another wall, he made me touch it. We then moved along it until we reached the corner and continued along the next wall. After a while, Tomoaki suddenly stopped walking. He took my arm and made me touch something warm. It was Kai, and I could feel him shaking. Wait a second. Was it Kai? And how could I be sure that whoever I was holding hands with was Tomoaki? In the pitch dark, I became so paranoid and started double-guessing everything. Tomoaki took my arm again, began moving, and I just followed. Then, out of nowhere, I began to see something. It was the moonlight. It was only a small bit of light, but it was coming through one of the gaps in the wall. Tomoaki was trying to take me to that spot. I don't know why I didn't notice myself. It wasn't the kind of darkness you have in your bedroom where your eyes get used to it after a while and you can see outlines of the furniture in your room. It was literally pitch dark in there, and human eyes weren't evolved enough to see in such darkness. Not only that, but I was swallowed up in fear. When I saw the faint moonlight, I felt saved and couldn't be more thankful for Tomoaki's existence than in that moment. I asked him about it after the fact, and he explained that maybe he was able to see that light because he wasn't as wrapped up in terror as Kai and I were. All Tomoaki could hear was the dragging sound outside, not the breathing, so he had enough mind space to think a bit more clearly than us. As we got to the side of the cabin with the moonlight and finally sat down, I saw that Tomoaki was holding on to Kai with his other hand. I looked at his face and saw that he was dripping with sweat and wet with tears. I don't know what happened or what he saw, but I could imagine. As opposed to the loud cicadas crying in the afternoon, it was super quiet now, other than the crickets. We sat there not moving. 3 college kids sitting in a circle, tightly holding hands with one another. With barely enough light to see each other, having the sure sensation that we were there together was the only way any of us felt safe. And then it finally happened. I mean, it was inevitable. Tomoaki took out the cloth bag that the monk gave to us earlier from his pocket, stood up and walked a couple of steps away. In the silence, we heard him taking a piss. Kai and I looked at each other and smiled. Just as we did so, we heard something. Kai! We remained silent until we heard it again. Kai! It was coming from the direction of the door. We knew who it was. It was Misaki. She said, Kai! Kai! I brought you some rice balls. There were long pauses between each sentence, as if she was waiting for us to respond. The weird thing was that there was no inflection in her voice. She spoke in a flat tone like a robot. I felt Kai's grip tighten and then heard the voice call out for him again. Another stretch of silence. Finally, the voice began repeating the same sentences over and over again like a broken record. I remembered the monk's words, how he said no one would be coming to see us until the morning. The flat mechanical way the voice spoke, it wasn't Misaki. We all knew it, but it sounded exactly like her. We were shitting bricks by this point. I noticed Tomoaki was back with us and he grabbed our arms. I knew he could hear the voice from the strength in his grip. We were all looking in the direction of the door and we didn't dare move. The voice was still repeating itself. Then the door began to shake. Whatever was outside was trying to pry open the door while it kept talking without interruption. I began thinking of what to do if it broke the door down and came in. I would run out at top speed towards the main hall where the monk said he and the others would be. But where's the main hall? The only thing I could think about was how to get out of this place. The noise suddenly changed to loud bangs as if the thing was ramming the door with its body, all the while still repeating the same phrases. Then it slowly began to move to the left. We could hear it dragging along the wall. We were sitting there barely breathing out of fear that it could hear us when I made a horrifying realization. There was a gap in the wall where we were sitting, and the thing was slowly making its way around the cabin towards us. What if it saw us through the gap? What if we saw it? I got up as quickly and as quietly as I could and pulled Tomoki and Kai towards the center of the room where the moonlight couldn't reach. It was still moving along the walls. My heart was thumping so loud I was scared that it would give our location away, or maybe it already knew where we were. My teeth started to chatter and I quickly bit down on my finger to stop the sounds. And then I saw it appear through the gap in the wall. It was illuminated by the moon. I could only hear it up to this point, but now I could clearly see it. It was pitch black except for its slanted eyes, which were completely white and seemed to be bulging out of its face. I assumed the thing was ramming its entire body into the door just before, but I was wrong. It was actually using its head. The face would disappear as if it was arching its back to the fullest, and in the next second, its face appeared again as it slammed its head into the wall. I could see its bulging white eyes as it repeatedly bashed into it. I wasn't paralyzed like the day before when I was on the second floor. I was shaking like a leaf. I was scared like hell, but I couldn't look away. Misaki's voice was still talking as it continued to smash its head against the wall. This thing was anything but an actual human being. After a while of hearing and watching this horrendous scene unfolding in front of me, it stopped. It began to slowly move again, which made me think that it hadn't been able to see us. Thank God for that. But it continued to replay in my mind, and I was at a point where I couldn't distinguish reality from my imagination. We remained still and silent as ever as it began to move again. Tomoaki decided to take us back to the moonlight, and when he grabbed my arm, he apparently thought I was dead. The reason for that was because my body was so stiff. He literally thought I died and my body was going through rigor mortis. Kai told us later that he was gritting his teeth so hard that his gums were bleeding. And again, Tomoaki was the only one who didn't see anything, but he did hear something that neither of us heard. As the thing moved further away from the cabin, he heard it squawking like a crow. The thing didn't come back after that, but none of us were able to relax. Our heads hung low and we didn't even look at each other anymore. Kai had wet himself, but we didn't think anything of it. We certainly couldn't blame him from doing so. I'd never felt this kind of exhaustion in my life. I'd never seen a creature like that before or since, and never had I experienced a night that was longer than this one. Even when the first morning light began to seep through into the cabin, we remained frozen in place, our heads still hanging down. The sound of sparrows chirping, the faraway sounds of cars on the road, everything seemed muffled. I wondered whether I would ever get out alive. When it was quite light out, we heard something walking towards the cabin. We tensed up again, preparing for yet another wave of terror. The footsteps got closer and went around to the back, stopping by the door. It began to rattle, and then we heard it open. The monk stood there and looked like he was about to cry as he saw us huddled together. "You did well," he said. I don't think I'll ever forget his eyes as he said those words. It was the kindest, most gentle gaze anyone could be capable of giving. I couldn't stand as all of my energy flooded out in one huge gush, and I started crying like a baby. He walked in despite the fact that the cabin was filthy with our sweat and piss, and gave each one of us a tight hug. I could smell incense on him, and I knew at this moment that I was going to live. And when I realized this, I began crying even harder. When the monk saw that I still couldn't stand, he called over the other man, and they carried me down to the house from the previous day. As we passed the temple, all three of us heard a scream. It started out low and then went up in pitch. Tomoaki said in my ear, "Didn't that sound like Makiko?" I didn't think it was, but it didn't not sound like her either. I was way too tired to think about it. When we got into the house, the 20-something-year-old girl looked at us with a somewhat disgusted face and told us to go wash ourselves. Can't blame her. We looked and smelled absolutely horrible. Too scared to be alone, the three of us took a shower together. When we were squeaky clean, we were led into the same tatami room as before. There were 3 futons laid out for us, so they were obviously telling us that the next step was to sleep. I knew this house was safe, and being so exhausted that it was almost painful, the 3 of us fell into a deep sleep as soon as our heads hit the pillow. Just as I slipped into a dreamless sleep, I had a quick thought to remind myself to call our other 2 friends that we were coming home. It was such a minor thing considering the ordeal we just went through, but our friends didn't know that we were literally about to die and that our plans to meet up were down the drain. I forgot to mention that when we walked out of the cabin, I asked Kai whether he could see anything. He said, "No, I can't see anything. We're saved. Thank you." When I heard him thank me, I decided to keep his loose bowel movements our little secret. We were alive and safe, and that's all that mattered. When we woke up, the monk explained everything to us. I learned of how scary human beings could get and how a very strong belief system could give rise to a terrifying reality. What Kai and I witnessed with our eyes and what Tomoaki heard, when we learned of its true nature, we just wanted to run away from this place forever. For those of you who have stuck through this story, thank you. I didn't think it would end up being this long. I didn't want to take any shortcuts, and so I wrote every single detail that I could remember. I apologize if it doesn't meet your expectations. From this point forward, I'm going to explain what the monk said to us, so I encourage you to read on only if you're curious to find out. We slept as if we were dead until the monk woke us up. After we sat up and situated ourselves in front of him, he said with a smile, "You boys did really well yesterday. I was able to successfully exercise the 3 of you." We smiled back at him. Although we probably each had a mountain of questions to ask, none of us said a word. The monk must have sensed it because he said, "I guess I should explain everything to you. There's something I want to show you. Follow me." He got up and walked out of the house and up towards the temple. When I saw Kai looking all around him as if he was looking for that thing again, I did the same. The monk noticed and said everything should be fine now. "Can you see anything?" he asked. Kai and I both answered in the negative. When we got to the temple, he showed us to the main hall. We followed him through a door on the other side, and we were in another tatami room very similar to the one in the house. He told us to wait, and he left us there. Kai seemed to be a bit nervous and started shaking his legs. The monk returned a bit later with a small wooden box. He sat in front of us and said, "This was how it all began," and opened the box. We looked and saw a shriveled up, dry, small black thing wrapped in cotton inside. What was it? I felt like I'd seen something like that before when it hit me. When I was small, I remember my mum taking out a small wooden box like this from a dresser drawer and bringing it to me. She looked so happy as she opened it and showed me what was inside. I had no idea what I was looking at, but it looked exactly like what the monk was showing us. I asked my mum what it was, to which she replied, "This is your umbilical cord. It's proof that you and I were connected to each other." As a child, I couldn't understand why she would keep something like that. "What is it?" asked Tomoaki. The monk replied that it was an umbilical cord. Tomoaki had never seen one before, but Kai and I had. He continued, "I'm sure your parents were the ones that showed it to you. There are many families who hang on to them as a keepsake. The one in this box is the same. A mother and her child are connected to each other through the umbilical cord. These days, hospitals and birthing clinics give the umbilical cord to the mother when they're discharged as a way to congratulate them. A lot of individuals decide to hang on to them, but there are many superstitions attached to umbilical cords. Back in the day, many people believed in these stories and took it very seriously. One such superstition says that if your child becomes so ill that he or she is on the brink of death, boiling the umbilical cord and having them drink the liquid will save their life. Another one says that if the child holds on to it, that it will protect the child from danger. Both stories have one thing in common: the mother's strong will and determination to protect her offspring. Now, can I tell you a story about this village? It's got everything to do with what has happened." We nodded. It was a long story and I can't remember it word for word, but hopefully it'll be enough to conclude the story and give you guys a sense of closure. The monk began. "The people here also used to believe in all the superstitions revolving around umbilical cords. Considering we're close to the ocean, many of the villagers were fishermen. When a baby was born, they would be out at sea with their father as soon as they were able to tag along. It was a normal occurrence. Fishing out at sea is a dangerous job. The mothers would be waiting nervously for their return each time they went out. This is just my feeling, but it must have been very tough for the mothers to wait for them to come home, not knowing whether they were alive or dead until they did so. It was around this time that the mothers began to give the umbilical cord to the child to protect them, and, if they got lost at sea, that they would be able to find their way home." "Find their way home?" I interrupted. "That's right. Remember, some of these children were still very small. I've heard that it wasn't that uncommon for them to get swept out by the waves. If they weren't found after a few days, they were deemed to be dead. The mothers would wait on the dock for days and days for their return, unable to accept reality. This is where the superstition brought on a new meaning. Just like how the unborn child and the mother were connected through the umbilical cord, a new belief began that it would bring back a lost child to their mother through this now invisible connection. Of course, none of the lost children ever came back, except for this one time. A mother came back crying tears of joy that her child had come home. No one believed her and thought she finally went crazy from grief, and rightfully so. Her child had gone missing more than 3 years ago. Kai piped in. "Maybe the kid washed up on shore somewhere and survived?" "There were people that thought the same," the monk replied. "They told her they wanted to see the child, but the mother told them it'll take some time until she could show her kid." What did that even mean? I thought. If the kid had come back, why couldn't she bring him or her forward straight away? It didn't really make sense. I suddenly got goosebumps for no reason. The monk continued speaking. There were many who doubted her and thought she was being overly cryptic, but seeing her grieve for the past several years, no one could push her any further, and they decided to back off. On the following day, the same thing happened to another mother. And just like the first woman, she told everyone that she couldn't show her child to anyone just yet. The people in the village were beginning to get really suspicious. The husband of the mother from the day before had died a short while ago, but the second mother, she was still married. People went looking for her husband and asked him whether it was true, but the husband had no idea what they were talking about. They continued to pry until the husband finally got angry and told them to mind their own business. A few days went by when someone from the village came forward. This person saw the first mother walking along the beach at night with her child. It was too dark to see full details, but from their silhouettes, the mother was seen holding hands with her kid, talking, and overall seemed very happy. Hearing a third person's unclouded observation, everyone felt horrible for doubting the mother and decided to drop by her house to apologize to her. The mother answered the door with the happiest smile across her face. After telling her how bad they felt for not believing her, she told them not to worry, that she couldn't be happier that her baby was back home with her. At that moment, she pulled her kid out from behind the door and hugged him close. Everyone froze as soon as they laid eyes on him. Apparently, his entire body was bluish purple. He was completely bloated, and from his swollen eyelids they could just see a sliver of the whites of his eyes. His pupils, which were barely detectable, were looking in opposite directions. There was foam coming out of his mouth, and he was making strange noises as the mother talked to him. They say it sounded like a crow. The mother looked down at him lovingly and pet his head, which was patchy because most of his hair had fallen out. Sure enough, everyone ran away as quick as their legs could carry them. That night, everyone gathered at the house of the village chief. They told him everything that they witnessed, to which the chief concluded that they would need help from a priest. This priest is my ancestor. Upon hearing what was happening in the village, the priest came to get the mother straight away. He took her back up to his temple by force, and apparently the kid was following them the whole way, letting out those eerie sounds as if it was crying. Once they walked into the temple, the priest took the mother to a room to talk to her, but she was in such an agitated state from being separated from her child that the only words she could string together properly was for the priest to give back her son. She was fighting back with all her might to break free, and although the priest used his full strength to try to pin her down, she pushed him away with incredible force and ran away. The priest tried looking for her with the help of the people from the village, but no one was in the house. When they walked in, they saw tons of offerda all over the walls and a big mountain of rotten food piled in the corner, releasing a horrible stench. I knew it was the same thing I saw up on the second floor. Everyone thought the same thing. The mother had been performing some kind of ritual out of grief, and this thing was born from it. They all stepped up their search efforts to find the woman, while the priest and a few of his followers proceeded to the second mother's house. Once there, they saw the husband trembling in fear while she talked to another grotesque-looking being. The priest began chanting a prayer as he walked towards the thing, but the mother turned to him, her eyes bulging, and began yelling out threats if he got any closer. It all sounded so far-fetched and fake, but I was sweating profusely. Everyone in the village was so scared that they didn't dare come closer to help the priest. But the priest himself and his followers managed to hold the woman down and carried her back to the temple. He continued to chant a prayer and throw salt onto the ground as the thing followed them all the way. They took the woman into the cabin, tied her down with a rope, and locked her inside. The priest and his followers made a circle around the cabin and began to perform an exorcism. The mother screamed and shouted, but they in turn raised their voices so that the thing couldn't hear her. After a while, it appeared out of the bushes. It was searching for its mother and began making circles around the cabin. Not knowing what to expect, the priest continued to pray. Soon after, the thing fell onto its hands and knees, almost as if it was too tired to walk upright. Its joints bent at impossible angles, and it began to crawl close to the ground like a spider. It was as if it was devolving from a human shape into something else. They heard it belch out a cry, and its arms and legs disappeared, its body rolling around like a caterpillar. As the night slowly turned into day, the thing began to shrink, and by morning it had turned back into its original form, an umbilical cord. I was hanging on to every word the monk spoke. It was as if he put some twists on what happened to us the previous night and was telling us a folklore. Tomoaki said, "Hold on a second. The one you have in that box right now." "Yes, we found it this morning. It was on top of a rock a few meters away from the cabin. "Are you serious?" asked Kai. "Why us?" I asked to no one in particular. "I don't know. These stories have been left in writing by previous priests, but I've never come across this happening to anyone other than a mother. We also don't know what ritual they performed in the first place to bring about these creatures," said the monk. The priest wasn't able to ask that woman. When they opened the cabin, they found her unresponsive inside. She was screaming for her child all night and she'd lost all of her energy. They took her to get treated, but when she woke up, she had lost her mind. It was impossible to ask her anything. It wasn't long before some people found the first woman who managed to run away. Her body was found washed up on the beach. Something had eaten pieces of her flesh, but a smile was plastered onto her face. No one knows what happened to her, but according to what the priest wrote, it said, the mother who had been eaten by her offspring brought nothing less than a picture-perfect smile on her face. After her body's discovery, the people decided to demolish her house. That's when a piece of memo was found amongst the mess. It looked like an account of how this thing came to life, kind of like a growth chart. There were dates on the left column and details of its growth on the right. I can't remember the exact dates, but I remember what was written on it, so just imagine that what I'm about to list now all have different dates associated with them. Number 1. I began the ritual. Number 2. Nothing's happened. Number 3. He's come home. Number 4. His arms and legs grew. Number 5. He started crawling. Number 6. He started talking. Number 7. He can stand. The paper was apparently full with the woman's thoughts and feelings. As for the second mother, she had started the ritual up in the attic, so her husband was completely oblivious to what was happening. Apparently, there were lots of similar cases written by the monk's ancestors, but unfortunately, none of it outlined what the mothers actually did or how they even found out about the ritual, meaning that none of them lived to tell the tale, or they went mentally insane that no one could get a word out of them. The monk told us that he was upset at the fact that he didn't find out about us earlier. It was the first time someone other than a mother had been affected, and he admitted he was at a loss. Even entire families living in a house would live their lives never knowing what their wife or mothers had birthed through this ritual. According to what had been passed down thus far, only the mother could see to the growth and development of this creature. Kai said, Makiko, is she one of those mothers? The priest didn't respond straight away, but when he did, we weren't surprised by the answer. He said, Makiko isn't from this village. She moved here when she got married to the husband. They had a son and they were a very happy family, but a few years ago their son got lost out at sea. There were search parties, but he was never found. Makiko was devastated, but with the help and support of her friends and the others from the town, she slowly found herself again. Their ryokan was doing well, and people were beginning to forget about the tragedy when the second floor suddenly got closed off. No one knew why, but they didn't bother asking. And the result was what you boys saw. I don't know how Makiko knew of the ritual, but that's exactly what happened up there. Usually, whatever is born attaches itself to the mother, but for some unknown reason, it attached itself to you. The only thing I can think of is that she hadn't given the umbilical cord to her son. She isn't from around here, so she didn't even know that such a practice existed. Her husband told me as much. To add to the strangeness of closing up the second floor, she proceeded to hire the 3 of you even though they had much less work to do. The husband was against it, but Makiko cried and told him that she missed his son and having you guys around would make her feel like he was back, so he finally agreed. This is just a feeling that I have, but I think she knew that the thing upstairs would try to possess one of you. I still feel terrible that I left the three of you all alone in that cabin, but I didn't have a choice. I had to save Makiko too. While you guys were here, I had to tie her down in the temple, and just as my ancestors had done, I prayed out loud all night long. I didn't know whether the thing would come here for Makiko or go up to the cabin for the three of you. I felt he had nothing to apologize for or feel bad about. Judging from what had occurred in the past, he obviously felt that Makiko could be in danger, even though the thing was actually following us around and not her. The monk was our savior. I looked over at Kai, who was trembling, but he wasn't crying. He was angry. He was so freaking mad that Makiko and her husband had almost killed us. He yelled and asked why the husband didn't warn us even though he knew something was going on. The monk replied that the husband didn't know. He only knew it as a kind of lore that's been passed down through generations. Kai wasn't satisfied. He demanded to see them and yelled and screamed at the monk. It took Tomoki and I a while to calm him down, and the monk sat there quietly, allowing Kai to release his anger. Once he calmed down a bit, the monk said, "When I made the decision to tell you boys the truth, I knew I had to show you everything. Please follow me. I'll take you to Makiko." We followed him further into the main hall, and we eventually went across a walkway that connected to a separate building. As we got closer, we could hear the chanting of prayers and gurgling and moaning sounds coming from within. There were thumping sounds too. I was scared to see what was going on inside, but the monk paid no mind and opened the door. Inside, Makiko was laying on the tatami floor surrounded by other monks who were reading out a prayer. I stood there with my mouth hanging open. Makiko was bouncing around like a fish out of water. I'd never seen a person move like that before. In fact, I didn't know how it was possible for humans to move in that manner. We could hear her gurgling and groaning intermittently as if she were in pain. I was too scared to look at her face. I felt a different kind of fear to the one from previous days. The monk spoke. "She's been like this since this morning. We can't seem to stop it." I don't want to be here," said Tomoaki, and all of us stepped out of the building. She was like a completely different person to the woman we said goodbye to. "I thought the exorcism was successful," I said when we were far enough from the building. "It was successful. You guys are standing here, and we found the umbilical cord not far from the cabin, but..." And Kai cut in. I knew it. There wasn't just one. It took only a couple of seconds for me to understand what he meant. When he first told us he saw the shadows, he told us he saw more than one. The monk couldn't hide his surprise. There was more than one? When Kai answered yes, he went silent until he seemed to remember something and told us to go back to the house and to not step a foot outside of the room we slept in. "I'll send someone for you later." He then ran back to where Makiko was. We stood there for some time until we saw them reappear from the building, carrying something that was wrapped up in a huge white cloth. It was writhing around, and we knew Makiko was inside. They were moving as quickly as they could towards the cabin. The three of us looked at each other and booked it out of there. We ran into the house and practically dove into the room the monk told us to remain in. Sorry to let you down, but absolutely nothing happened while we were in there. Another monk came to see us a while later and told us that we had to stay there one more night. He remained in the room with us, and the four of us awkwardly spent the night together. We woke up early the next morning and were watching TV when the monk came in. He told us we were free to leave. He had to double-check, but was now sure that there was only one of those things following us, and it was completely exorcised from this world. We were so relieved to hear it. But, the monk said, Makiko wasn't so lucky. I couldn't tell whether he was angry or about to cry. "Did she die?" we asked. "No, she didn't die," he replied. The image of her flopping around on the floor popped back into my head. Was she still stuck in that loop? We asked the monk, but he didn't accept nor deny it. He told us briefly that whatever was happening to her had nothing to do with something possessing her, so it was impossible to perform an exorcism. Whatever ritual she did was different to the one that had been occurring in this village for decades. He guessed that Makiko heard about the ritual from someone somewhere and decided to try it to bring her son back. But instead of her son having the umbilical cord, she had it with her. She proceeded anyway with trial and error, and whatever was born from it was something entirely different. There was more than one on the second floor, and it's unclear if what was meant to be her son was actually among them or not. There wasn't a happy ending for these mothers. They know that when they begin the ritual, but they proceed regardless of that fact because their want and need to have their baby back is stronger than anything else in the entire world. Kai asked what was going to happen to her, but the monk couldn't answer that question because he didn't know. Or at least, that's what he told us. When we were done talking, the husband came into the room. I was shocked to see his face. He was ashen and he looked like he hadn't slept for days. He walked over to us and began crying and apologizing profusely. We couldn't understand what he was saying between his sobs, but I guess he was crying from guilt and what his wife had instigated. We asked the priest to call a taxi to take us to the train station. One of the men who helped carry me out of the cabin accompanied us, and boy, did he love to talk. The three of us were feeling quite depressed with what happened over the last few days, but he didn't seem to notice at all. From all the talking he was doing, we were able to figure out that the monk actually did know how to perform the ritual. We were able to gather as much because the man told us not to try it when we got back. Anything that happens will be all on us, he said. There was no way this man knew, and not the monk. And now we were worried that he'd lied to us about our safety, but we didn't have the energy to go back to the temple. We just needed to get out of there, so we paid the taxi driver and hopped on the train. None of us talked the whole trip home. Since then, nothing has happened. I mean, that's why I'm able to sit here and share this story with you right now. Kai has become really scared of spiders ever since this trip, and as for me, I've become a bit fearful of the dark, but nothing crazy. A fair while after all this happened, the three of us talked to the other two friends that were supposed to meet up with us that summer. They seemed to believe most of what we told them, and they decided to call the ryokan out of curiosity. What assholes. Anyway, some woman answered the phone and they could hear crows crying in the background. They told us to call to see if it was Makiko who answered. Whether it's her or not, I definitely don't have the courage to call that number, ever, again.